Welcome to this new automotive news video for Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. And today we're going to talk a lot about Stellantis because 2 days before unveiling its full strategic plan, the group is already starting to share some information about it, such as the return of two iconic models that will be sold for less than 15,000 euros. We'll also talk about another Stellantis news item since yesterday DS revealed the prices for the DS7, and you'll see that it's still very expensive. We'll also talk about Skoda, which is revealing a whole bunch of new information about its Epic model. And finally, we'll talk about Shell, one of the largest oil companies in the world, which wants to pull out of France, not Europe. I hope these topics will interest you. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and of course, leaving a comment where you share your opinion on today's news. As I was saying, we'll start by talking a bit about Stellantis, which will unveil its full strategic plan on May 21st in 2 days. But in the meantime, is already giving us some information about it. Today, we learned that Stellantis wants to relaunch two of its iconic models, which will be sold new in Europe for less than 15,000 euros. We agree, 15,000 euros is quite a sum, but it's still a price that's much lower than most cars currently sold on the European market. Let me remind you that the average price of a new car in France right now in 2026 is 38,000 euros. So how is Stellantis going to manage to offer models that are so much cheaper than the rest of the cars currently being sold? Well, they're going to do it by taking advantage of a new car category that was created by the European Commission, the M1E category. The cars that will belong to this category, including the two cars we're going to talk about today in this video, will have to meet several criteria, but in return, manufacturers will be able to benefit from significant advantages. The first is that these cars will have to comply with safety standards that are much lower than those of other traditional vehicles. Less mandatory safety means fewer required safety features. This results in cars that are cheaper for brands to produce and therefore can also be sold at a lower price at dealerships. The second advantage is more about the CO2 emissions targets that brands have to meet every year. Each car in the M1E category will not count as one unit in the calculation of each manufacturer's annual CO2 emissions, but as 1.3 units. And since all these M1E cars have to be 100% electric, it's also going to be an opportunity for manufacturers to lower their annual CO2 emissions much more, without really needing to sell a lot more electric cars. Now, the cars have to meet several conditions. They must be less than 4.2 meters long. They also have to be 100% electric, and they must comply with a power limitation, which has not yet been clearly announced by the European Commission. But we know we're talking about very small cars here, with very small engines, very limited range, and probably a speed limiter that will be set somewhere around 90 to 110 km/h. So we're really talking about vehicles here that are entirely dedicated to the city, which won't have the versatility of the small city cars we used to see a few years ago, like the Citroën C1, for example, which was still able to go on the highway, even if it wasn't comfortable. With a full tank of gas, you could drive on the highway at 130 km/h for several hundred kilometers in a row. Stellantis, having noticed that Dacia absolutely wants to launch a model in this category, the Dacia Hipster, which will arrive in a few months, doesn't want to let them have the entire market, and so plans to launch two models in this M1E category. The first will be the Fiat Panda, which will be much smaller than the current Grande Panda being sold, and will replace the current generation Panda, which has ultimately become the Pandina, while still drawing inspiration from the look and design of the original Panda from the 1980s. We know that this car will be based on the STLA City platform, which is the platform of the Fiat 500, and we know that it will be produced in Italy at the Pomigliano plant, which currently produces the Fiat Pandina, and also, if I'm not mistaken, the Alfa Romeo Tonale. Alongside that, Citroën will also launch its own version in the M1E category, which, according to the brand's boss, will draw its inspiration from the spirit of the Citroën 2CV, but also from other quite popular models like the Diane or the Visa, as well as the Citroën C1. We know less about this one, but it's likely to use the same chassis, the STLA City platform, since Stellantis typically reuses everything possible, and since there's a good chance it will have the same batteries, the same motors, and that the only differences between the Panda and the future 2CV will be purely aesthetic. Both will be manufactured in the same place, namely in Italy. We're discussing fully electric cars, although Stellantis first planned for M1E hybrids. But since Stellantis is a bit behind on its CO2 targets, there's a good chance the group doesn't want to sell a small car with a combustion engine, even though it would sell very, very well, considering its price and also the fact that it would probably be more versatile than the fully electric versions. And in the end, that would end up sending its CO2 totals through the roof. We'll see how it turns out. Isn't the M1E category kind of a last-ditch effort? European manufacturers who have somewhat lost the electric car battle and are now looking for something else to try to boost sales. Isn't making such a limited-purpose car risky since it may only attract a small niche of customers? And will this niche of customers really want to invest 15,000 euros in a vehicle that's absolutely incapable of doing anything other than city driving? Even occasionally, that's still a particularly risky bet. By the way, another risky bet at Stellantis is the pricing of the DS7, because over at DS, they're really indulging themselves. The DS number 7 replaces the old DS7. It's a model that alone accounted for nearly half of the brand's global sales. So now almost the entire future of DS depends on the sales of this new DS number 7. DS number 7, whose prices will start at 43,900 euros for the hybrid versions and 46,990 for the electric versions. Knowing that at this price, well, it's not amazing. The hybrid version, sold for almost 44,000 euros, only comes with a new generation 1.2-liter PureTech hybrid engine that produces 145 horsepower nothing to really get excited about. And as for the electric versions, well, it's not incredible either, technologically speaking. The 47,000 euro version will be the 230 horsepower version, which will have 74 kilowatt-hour batteries and can travel 540 kilometers on a single charge. For the same price with Tesla, you get 60 kilometers more range. And above all, a vehicle that's based on an 800-volt architecture, whereas the DS7 is still on a 400-volt architecture. As a result, it delivers relatively low charging speeds, peaking at just 160 kilowatts. And then, most importantly, there will be two versions, 245 and 350 horsepower with prices ranging from 50,000 to 77,000 euros. Equipped with a 97 kilowatt-hour battery, the famous battery that's made in France in the north at ACC, which currently has about a year to a year and a half wait. Understand that there's a strong chance that if you order the DS7 long range, you won't receive it until the end of 2027, or even the beginning of 2028, which starts to feel like a long wait for a vehicle that, by 2026 when it's released, is already quite outdated. Technologically, compared to the competition, let me remind you that for the same price, 77,000 euros, you can start looking at the BMW iX3, which offers much higher power, much faster charging speeds, and of course, much greater range. Now, it's true that when it comes to equipment, DS offers quite a lot, even on the entry-level version, which still includes nice 19-inch wheels, keyless entry and start, a large 16-inch central touchscreen, as well as rear and side parking assistance with a backup camera. And the higher you go with the top versions, the more features you get. I'll display them during editing. And it's probably because of all these features that DS ends up with a price similar to that of a big German SUV from Mercedes, Audi, or BMW, even though technologically and in terms of engine, it performs far worse. By the way, since we're talking about price, you should know that Skoda just announced the Skoda Epic. It's a compact and electric SUV. It's built on the MEB platform, just like the Cupra Raval and the Volkswagen ID. Polo, its cousins from the Volkswagen Group, and 80 of its components are shared with other models from the group, which allows Volkswagen to reduce its production costs and therefore offer an entry-level price of around 26,000 euros. That's still quite a sum, but it's still 10,000 euros less, for example, than one of its rivals, the Ford Puma. It will be offered with 2 batteries and 3 different powertrains. The first, a 37 kilowatt-hour battery that gives it a WLTP range of 310 kilometers. Don't forget, in practice, it will actually be much less overall. And a 52 kilowatt-hour version offering 440 kilometer range. As for charging speed, it can reach 105 kilowatts, which allows these batteries to go from 10 to 80% charge in about 24 minutes. In terms of power, there are 3 power levels available: the 113, 132, and 206 horsepower versions. And inside, to keep production costs down, Volkswagen has removed some features compared to the Cupra Raval or the ID Polo, such as the driver's display, which is much smaller, but it still keeps a 13-inch central screen for infotainment, bi-directional V2L charging, and level 2 semi-autonomous driving. To finish, let's talk about Shell, one of the largest oil companies in the world, which is simply looking to sell all its French stations. Just to be clear, we're talking about the French stations here, not the European stations, since Shell wants to stay in other European Union countries, but wants to leave France for a pretty simple reason in the end: too many constraints, too many taxes, and not enough profitability. In practical terms, this probably will not mean higher prices in France. It will simply mean fewer gas stations, not everywhere. Highway stations are unlikely to close since they're the most profitable. In rural areas, it probably won't change much because there aren't many left already, but also generally because the profit margins are very high. What might change, however, concerns all the stations you see on the outskirts of cities, on ring roads, and in industrial or shopping areas. All those stations that belong to Shell are intermediate stations that aren't particularly profitable and might not necessarily find a buyer. Still, this isn't the first company to leave France. BP left some time ago, then ESO, and after this, there will only be two major oil companies left in France, Eni and, of course, Total. That's it. We've covered today's news. I hope you found the video interesting. If so, please show your support by leaving a like, subscribing, and becoming a supporter via the join button below this video. See you tomorrow for the next one. Bye.